So if you take like a single subatomic particle and you try to completely isolate it, I mean, if you somehow cut it off from the invisible underlying energy field that surrounds it, it doesn't just stop moving.
Right. It doesn't just freeze.
No, it literally ceases to exist. It just vanishes. And according to this really fascinating synthesis of ancient theology and modern psychology we are looking at today, your mind and your life operate the exact same way when you try to isolate yourself through, endless ego-driven hustling.
It completely inverts the modern metric for success, doesn't it?
Mm.
Yeah, we are constantly conditioned to believe that fulfillment comes from accumulating more
Hmm.
wealth, more status, a more rigid control over our immediate reality.
Yeah, the daily grind.
Exactly. But when we look closely at the underlying mechanics of how the universe actually functions, that frantic accumulation is, well, it's actually a recipe for erasure.
And that is exactly what you're going to get out of this deep dive today. Because look, I know you are always looking for that fundamental understanding of how things actually work beneath the surface noise, right?
Yeah.
But without getting bogged down in the endless scroll of information overload.
Right.
So today, we're analyzing a brilliant essay by Rabbi Shlomo Ezagui, and it's titled From Rebbe to Jung to Quantum Physics, The Truth That Less Means More. And our mission here is to uncover how three radically different disciplines, ancient Chassidic wisdom, depth psychology from Carl Jung, and modern quantum mechanics, how they all point to the exact same universal architecture of reality.
Which is pretty wild when you think about it. And the central paradox of this architecture is that true substance, infinite potential, and genuine power do not come from magnifying your ego or asserting your absolute independence.
Right.
They come from doing the exact opposite.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because on the surface, connecting an ancient Chassidic rabbi, a 20th century Swiss psychiatrist, and, the behavior of subatomic particles sounds like we're just throwing buzzwords into a blender.
It does sound a bit like a stretch at first glance.
Yeah, so let's start with the theological side, because the essay begins with the foundational teachings of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. There is this core Chassidic paradox mentioned in the text, the idea that the only true something is the nothingness of self-effacement, and conversely, that nothingness is the only true something.
Right, the concepts of yesh and ayin.
Mm-hmm.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is really about recognizing the hierarchy of reality.
Okay.
In this framework, the physical universe, the tangible things we interact with every single day, is not inherently evil or bad.
Okay.
But it lacks independent, ultimate reality.
Yeah.
It does not generate its own existence. It is entirely dependent on a higher, infinite source to sustain it moment by moment.
Right, but human nature is basically wired to do the exact opposite of that.
Oh, absolutely.
We treat the material world as the absolute ultimate reality. We look at our bank accounts, our job titles, our cars, and we elevate those physical metrics to a state of absolute importance. We treat them as the source of our security.
And that cognitive error is exactly where the barrier is formed. The essay uses a profound metaphor here, pointing out that just as fire and water cannot dwell together in a single vessel, the frantic, obsessive pursuit of materialism and a connection to the divine cannot coexist within the human soul.
Wow, so they cancel each other out.
Exactly. You simply cannot have two ultimates. If you elevate physical matter to a permanent state of supremacy, you create a catastrophic detachment from the spiritual source that actually gives that matter its life to begin with.
And I have to push back here because if I'm sitting in traffic on a Tuesday, worrying about paying my mortgage or feeding my family, that spiritual concept can sound incredibly frustrating.
Sure, it can feel very detached from real life.
Right. If the physical world is subordinate, and if treating it as ultimately important cuts me off from the divine, why should we even engage with it? Why shouldn't we all just abandon our daily labor, stop caring about careers, and go become ascetics living off the grid in a cave somewhere?
Yeah, this raises a really important question, and honestly, it is the most common misunderstanding of mystical theology. The goal here is not passive resignation.
Okay.
It is not about escaping the physical world or treating your daily responsibilities as, meaningless distractions.
Because if you just escape, you're not actually solving the problem of the material world, you're just ignoring it, deleting all your apps just to stare at a blank phone screen.
Precisely. The true purpose of human existence, according to these teachings, is to transform the material world into a dwelling place for that infinite source.
Yeah.
You don't abandon the physical world, you fundamentally alter the mechanics of your relationship to it.
So instead of treating a successful business as the ultimate end goal, where the wealth is just hoarded to inflate your own ego, you treat the business as a mechanism, like a transient vehicle.
Yes.
The money becomes a tool to support your family, to give to charity, to inject ethics into the marketplace.
Exactly. You engage with the physical world, but you do it through humility and self-effacing service. You dissolve the illusion that your material acquisitions are the source of your power.
Right, taking the ego out of it.
And when your ego stops inflating the absolute importance of your physical possessions, you clear the structural bottleneck. The physical world ceases to be a concrete wall and instead becomes an open channel for infinite blessings.
That makes perfect sense structurally. You aren't deleting the material world, you are turning it into a conduit. But living in that state of self-effacing nothingness sounds psychologically exhausting.
It can definitely seem that way.
I mean, human brains are evolutionarily wired to crave control and predictability. If I just let go of my aggressive ambitions, won't I just fall apart? How does this actually operate inside the human mind?
And that logical leap brings us directly to the second discipline in the essay Carl Jung and Depth Psychology.
Oh, this is the part I was waiting for.
Right, because Jung's observations regarding the human psyche, the ego, and the phenomena and synchronicity perfectly map onto that Chassidic spiritual paradox we just talked about.
How so?
Well, Jung observed that a mind aggressively fixated on a singular material outcome is actually a deeply fragile and closed mind.
We see this all the time in high-pressure environments, right? Think about the person who obsessively fixates on a rigid professional milestone. They tell themselves, I must be the vice president of my division by the time I'm 35, and I need to make exactly this amount of money or my life is a total failure.
Right. And by obsessing over that one specific hyper-defined outcome, they impose a severe limitation on reality. They are signaling to their environment and to their own subconscious, really, that only one preconceived path is acceptable.
I want to look at the actual cognitive mechanics of this for a second, because when you get that obsessed, you trigger something in the brain called the reticular activating system, or the RAS.
Yes, the filtering system.
Exactly. It's the filter that decides what information gets through to your conscious mind. If you are frantically focused on forcing one specific door open, your RAS literally filters out your peripheral vision. You could be walking past 3 other much better opportunities, but your brain deletes them because they don't match the rigid blueprint your ego demanded.
And what's fascinating here is that this immense psychological tension, that frantic lust for survival and control, actually repels the very outcomes the person is desperately chasing.
Because they come off as desperate, they alienate people, they burn bridges, and they miss creative solutions because they are so rigidly focused on forcing reality to bend to their will.
Yes, the individual becomes psychologically fragmented. They are no longer operating as a cohesive whole. They are entirely dominated by the ego's defensive superficial masks.
Right.
By forcing the issue so intensely, they block the natural organic flow of life and creativity.
So what does this all mean for the way we actually live? If hyper-focusing is a trap, what did Jung suggest as the alternative?
Jung suggested cultivating a state of open receptivity, which he described as creating a void in consciousness.
Okay, a void in consciousness. I have to play devil's advocate here. If I just create a void and release all my demands on reality, isn't that just apathy? I mean, if I stop forcing outcomes and just shrug my shoulders at my career and my life, won't I just end up achieving absolutely nothing?
It is vital that we differentiate the two because they are fundamentally different mechanisms. Apathy is a lack of care. Apathy is a total detachment from action. You give up.
Right, you're just checking out.
Exactly. But the void Jung is talking about is a deliberate, active release of the ego's demand that reality must conform strictly to your specific blueprint.
So you still care deeply, and you still take rigorous action, but you detach your identity from the exact way the result manifests. It's like driving at night. Your ego, your specific goals, they're the headlights. You absolutely need them to see the next 10 feet so you don't crash. But if you stare exclusively into the bright beam of the headlights and demand that the entire world exists only inside that beam, you are going to miss the actual road, and you'll probably drive off a cliff.
That is an excellent way to visualize it.
Yeah.
You relinquish the desperate need to dictate every variable. You observe your life and execute your tasks without that frantic, suffocating anxiety.
Contention is gone.
And when you do that, when you stop fighting the natural, complex flow of existence, the deeper, more intuitive layers of the psyche are finally allowed to operate.
And this is where Jung's concept of synchronicity comes into play.
Yes. Synchronicity, in this context, refers to those meaningful coincidences and intuitive breakthroughs that seem to happen magically, but are actually the result of an open system. When you drop the rigid ego defenses, you suddenly meet the exact right person, or you stumble upon a brilliant lateral solution to a problem. Not because you forced it into existence through sheer willpower, but because you created the receptive cognitive space for it to emerge.
Life starts happening with you, rather than you trying to drag life behind you through sheer exhaustion. And what's wild is how perfectly this psychological surrender mirrors the Chassidic spiritual realization we just talked about. Letting go of ego-driven demands opens the door to unanticipated grace and infinite potential.
It is the exact same underlying mechanism, just observed through a different lens.
But this leads to the ultimate structural question. I mean, it is one thing to say this rule applies to human theology, and it applies to human cognitive psychology, but does it apply to the literal physical fabric of the universe itself? Does reality fundamentally operate this way when there are no human brains around to perceive it?
It does. And this is where the synthesis of the essay becomes truly astonishing. Because if we zoom all the way down to the subatomic scale, quantum mechanics reveals this identical structural truth.
Let's dive into the quantum architecture. We are talking about quantum field theory here.
Yes. In modern physics, we understand that particles are not tiny, isolated billiard balls bouncing around in empty space.
Right, that's the old way of thinking about it.
Exactly. Every particle in the universe, whether it's an electron, a quark, or a photon, emerges from an underlying quantum field. These fields permeate all of space and time. A particle is simply a localized excitation, a temporary ripple in that massive underlying ocean of potential energy.
Okay, so the field is the infinite potential, and the particle is the specific, localized manifestation of that potential.
Correct. Now, for a particle to function in the physical world, it requires a distinct identity. It needs specific measurable characteristics, like a particular mass or a specific spin vector.
Which is essentially the particle's unique fingerprint. It determines how it interacts with other forces.
Yes, it needs that localized identity. But, and here is the quantum paradox, that particle is still fundamentally entangled with and sustained by the greater field.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Right. If a wave function somehow became completely localized and entirely severed from the underlying field, if it achieved absolute independent existence, it would instantly collapse into nothingness.
Because it doesn't generate its own energy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It would lose the energy that sustains it. True physical reality and limitless energy at the subatomic level do not arise from isolation. A particle can only maintain its individual existence if it preserves its distinct identity without severing its foundational link to the infinite field.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about human consciousness like a whirlpool in a flowing river. A whirlpool absolutely needs a specific, defined shape to exist as an individual entity.
Right, it needs boundaries.
Exactly. It has a boundary, it has a form. You can point to it and say, there is a whirlpool. That boundary is our ego. That's our self-definition. We need that shape to interact with society, just like the quantum particle needs a spin vector to interact with other matter.
I really like this analogy.
But if that whirlpool suddenly becomes arrogant and says, I am the ultimate reality, I am entirely self-made, and I don't need this river, and it tries to build a thick concrete wall around itself to become totally independent, well, it cuts itself off from the flowing water.
And the whirlpool instantly disappears.
It's gone. Because the river was the only thing actually sustaining its shape.
It is a profound parallel, and it links the subatomic reality perfectly back to the human experience we just discussed.
Yeah.
We gain our individuality and our ability to act in the world through our ego and our self-definition. But when we cling too tightly to that identity, when we magnify it through arrogance or through the frantic, obsessive pursuit of materialism, we are building that concrete wall. We actively detach ourselves from the transcendent, infinite source that actually sustains our creativity and our life force.
We force ourselves to become that isolated particle, severed from the quantum field.
Yes. Just as a subatomic particle derives its literal existence from the broader quantum field, human consciousness and human potential derive their vitality from a higher source. When you understand the mechanics of this, you realize that dissolving your arrogant identification with transient physical forms, when you stop believing that your bank account or your social status is your ultimate reality, You reconnect with that field of pure potentiality.
You take down the concrete wall, you let the river flow through you again, and suddenly you aren't expending all your energy just trying to maintain your own artificial boundaries.
And by dropping those defenses, you unlock an inexhaustible reservoir of strength, creativity, and profound spiritual alignment.
This is an incredible unification of thought. We are looking at a seamless, universal architecture of reality that completely ignores disciplinary boundaries. The core lesson is identical every single time.
It is entirely unified. Think about the sequence we just mapped out. We have the theological imperative of Chassidic wisdom, which teaches that we must strip the physical world of its false permanence to make it a transparent conduit for the divine.
Right.
Then we have the cognitive and psychological necessity outlined by Jung, which proves that we must create an ego void, a release of rigid control to stop repelling positive outcomes and invite synchronicity.
Yeah.
And finally, the literal quantum reality, where an isolated identity must remain deeply connected to the infinite field of pure potentiality just to physically exist.
Across all three domains, theology, psychology, and physics materialism and the unbridled ego are exposed for what they truly are. They're hollow, fragile, highly restrictive constructs that actively alienate you from your source of power.
It is important to reiterate that neither the physical world nor your individual identity are inherently bad. They are not meant to be destroyed or despised.
You still need the headlights.
Yes,
Yeah.
but they must be properly contextualized. They are secondary. They are fleeting, localized manifestations of a much deeper, infinite reality.
Which brings us right back to you, sitting there listening to this. Because the practical application of this unified theory is incredibly liberating. True happiness, infinite blessings, and real success are never secured by frantic hoarding. They are never secured by relentlessly defending a fragile ego or forcing reality to bend to your specific blueprint.
No, they really aren't.
Fulfillment arises the exact moment you have the courage to humble yourself. It happens when you recognize that material permanence is an illusion, and you intentionally step back to allow a greater reality to flow through you. By humbly reducing your psychological footprint and your demand for material control, you step out of the exhausting, desperate striving that defines model culture.
You find that harmony.
Exactly. You move into a state of effortless harmony. And as the essay we've been unpacking points out, this is the precise moment where the divine source, the physical universe, and your own psyche all converge to provide you with limitless sustenance, enduring peace, and unshakable joy.
It requires a profound mechanical shift in how we approach our daily lives. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we'll leave you with one final thought to mull over, building directly on this idea of reducing our footprint.
Please do.
In modern society, we measure the value of our lives by the massive footprint we leave behind. Our monumental achievements, our accumulated wealth, our permanent legacy. We are told that we must leave a mark.
Right, that's the whole goal for most people.
But if the fundamental architecture of the universe, from ancient mysticism to the neural pathways of the human brain all the way down to the quantum fields, dictates that true power comes from becoming a nothingness and stepping back to let a greater reality flow through you, what if the ultimate human achievement isn't about leaving a massive permanent mark on the world at all? What if the greatest, most powerful legacy you can possibly achieve is, well, to become so frictionless, so devoid of ego, that you leave no footprint at all?